Welcome to the lounge. My name's Toby Roydell, and I'm so glad you joined me today. Are you quick to spot the weaknesses on others, but hate to get critiqued yourself? Feedback time. Robert Allen once said, "There is no failure, there is only feedback." So, today it's all about feedback. And that there is good feedback, that there is bad feedback, and that there is useless feedback. What is important about feedback is that we all must learn and understand that feedback is nothing bad, it's not our enemy, that it is a chance, and that it helps us, if it is done properly, to improve. But there's the issue, if it's done properly. And are there a lot of people that give good feedback? I guess it's safe to say that every single one of us had bad experiences with feedback in the past. The most popular example is after a presentation in school, your teacher forces everyone in class to give some feedback, some positive and some negative feedback. And we all know how that went. Your PowerPoint presentation is good, you had good eye contact, you spoke freely, and I liked your presentation. Those are the sentences that I heard all the time, for every single presentation. And there were lots and lots. But to be quite honest, this is absolutely useless and has almost nothing to do with actual feedback. And that is not good. And that's why I will tell you today what you can do as a giver of feedback and as a receiver of feedback to really benefit from feedback. In general, good feedback can only happen if you think about it in depth and if you mean it. That means if you want the other person to improve and get better at something. If you don't think about it in depth, you might as well just leave it. If the other person is willing or in the position of taking feedback and drawing the right conclusions from it, is a completely different story, because it's their job to do something with your feedback. As I said, there are two sides of feedback, the giver and the receiver. And they are, quite surprisingly, two completely different skills that have to be mastered on their own. You can't learn that together. They're two different skills, and I'll tell you why. First, giving feedback, the giver. Number one, you have to make good observations on the things that the presenter, that the person you want to give feedback to, is unaware of. Number two, do not hurt the other person while saying it. You do not want to offend anyone with your feedback, because when you offend someone with your feedback, obviously they will not be receiving it in a good way, trying to improve on it. Number three is don't blame or judge the other person for it. It's entirely up to them if they do something with your feedback. It's just on you to give them the observations. So there is no room, no place for anything aggressive or offensive, because there's no reason. You are analyzing, not judging anyone. Number four, kind of similar, but in a different way important, do not critique their views and beliefs, because this is a very personal thing and has nothing to do within the process of giving feedback. That's something for a personal discussion. And finally, number five, and this might be the most important thing, and I've done this wrong myself in the past. Never give reasons or examples why the other person might have done that. Because by doing that, you will ruin your whole feedback. Let me give you an example. You notice that someone has a really highly sophisticated speech, but you think you could give some feedback along those lines. Well, I really like what you said, but if you used a few more strong adjectives, then your story would be so much better. even better. That is good feedback. But if you now give a reason for it, you ruin it completely. If you say something like, but I think it's because you were absent in our English class where we discussed adjectives. That might be the case why you didn't use them. So you gave a likely or possible reason why that might have been the case, but you ruin your point because you probably offended someone, because it sounds kind of rude, and that's not necessary. Because if the person isn't in the position of receiving feedback, the person will know why he or she has done something not as good as they could. So never give reasons of why they could be. That's the job of the receiver. So let's move on what the receiver of feedback has to do. There are another 4 points that are really important here. Number 1, it might be extremely obvious, but it is to be ready for feedback. If you hold your presentation, you think I'm done, I can sit down afterwards, and all of a sudden someone says, probably your teacher, let's give him some feedback. Does anyone here in the room have some positive or negative feedback? And then you're like, oh no, not this again. In that situation, you're not ready for feedback, and it's very likely that you won't benefit from anything useful that is being said because you're just not ready. So be ready for feedback. Number 2, being okay to be confronted with your weaknesses. You need to be okay by someone saying something negative. Negative feedback is not bad feedback. Negative feedback is useful. Don't forget that. So by being confronted with your weaknesses, I do not mean something serious or anything like that. Just something like, I notice that you speak so fast, it's sometimes really hard to keep up with you. The difference is, if you heard that for the first time, it might shock you or throw you off guard. But if you're familiar with your own weaknesses, you can say, I did that again. Okay, yeah, but thank you for reminding me. That's the difference. You're not thrown off by someone saying that because you're familiar with your own weaknesses, like speaking too fast, too slowly, using too many uhs and ums, classics like that. Because no one will most likely attack you with some serious issues in a feedback session, most likely. This brings us to point number 3. What happens if someone actually attacks you personally in a feedback? This might happen from time to time, that someone uses some sarcasm or some underlying message to attack you directly. This is particularly unfair when they attack or when they critique something that you cannot change, like the tone of your voice, for example. Of course, you could train that with a vocal trainer or something like that, but most people don't do that. So you have your voice, and if someone finds your voice annoying or something like that, it's not fair to critique that, because in the spot you cannot do anything about it. So this is what I would consider bad feedback. This is not negative, it is just bad if it is meant to be aggressive, offensive, and something like that. But point number 3 is about how you want to deal with that. You need to have some methods to deal with that. You can, if you're clever enough, you can make fun of it or pull off a joke to solve the situation. You could also just ignore it and move on with some other feedback. And if it was really something you're not okay with, it is probably a good idea to get in touch with that person afterwards in a close, how do you say that? To have a chat with him afterwards. A little chat about what happened, and to tell him that you're not okay with what happened. Something like that. But you need to have a method how to deal with some aggressive or offensive feedback too, that you're not completely thrown off by that. Finally, point number 4, the most obvious of them all, how to draw conclusions from the feedback you receive and how to get, finally, better at it. To sum all those things up a little bit, feedback has, from my experience, a tendency to hurt. We're talking about negative feedback, because from that you can learn the most. As bad as that sounds. From negative feedback you can learn the most, and therefore it has a tendency to hurt. Even if told nicely, or especially if told nicely. But on the other side, saying I don't need feedback is not good at all. Because saying I do not need feedback comes across as being arrogant, blind for your weaknesses, and to be honest, utterly stupid. That goes for constructive and useful feedback. For aggressive, offensive feedback, just learn to not listen to that too much and don't let it get to you. Because people will do that every once in a while, and you do not have to take everything so serious that people tell you. But once in a while, spare a little thought if there might have been some truth in that as well. Just don't be blind for feedback that you encounter. And I know this is way easier said than done. But to say it in the words of Ken Blanchard, feedback is the breakfast of champions. If you liked today's video, give it a thumbs up. And if you have any different or the same opinion, you know where to put them, and I'm happy to read. New videos will be coming out every 2 weeks on Monday, so make sure to check them out. My name is Toby Roydell, and I'm so glad you joined me today, and I hope to see you again next time here in my lounge.